February 1, 1947. Our relationship to psychological space. State equals place. Some of you have heard it said that while everyone is somewhere in physical space, at the same time he or she is somewhere in psychological space. It is obvious that a living person as regards the physical, visible body must be somewhere in physical space in some distinct place. But unless you reflect on the matter, it is not so obvious that everyone is at the same time in some distinct place in psychological space. Outwardly, by our external senses, we can observe where we or others are in visible space. This work is to train us to observe where we are internally in this psychological space that all esoteric teaching is about. Each of us dwells somewhere in a vast psychological country, the same for everyone. In this inner psychological space, only apprehended by the inner senses, it is possible for a man or woman to spend their lives in a very bad part of it, without ever realizing it. In the work we seek to change our habitat internally. For example, the cultivation of negative emotions, the love of negative states in general, puts us in a bad part of this vast, inner psychological space where the spirit of a person dwells. That is, we can live physically in comfort and psychologically in a wretched part which, if it were represented by visible space, we would be horrified at and seek to leave at once. Suppose a person's favorite, most habitual psychological activity, consists in internal considering, in blaming, in making accounts against others, in violence, in feeling upset by every life event, in being negative and so on, then such a person inhabits psychologically, spiritually, a bad place internally. He or she dwells, inwardly, in a bad place, however healthily outwardly. How then to get out of it? First, by observing that it is so and acknowledging it. Then by work on oneself on non-identifying with one's states. Remember, state is place in this inner invisible realm which is psychological space. Whatever state you are in, there you place yourself. Suppose you have mean, narrow thoughts and instantly you were to find yourself physically in a mean, narrow street. That would certainly give you a shock. This does not happen in physical space and just as well. But it happens in psychological space always and instantly. So reflect again on the saying that state is place internally. Whatever state you are in, so you're in a certain place internally, psychologically. This must become as real to you as what would be corresponding in outer space where at least we learn not to walk in mud and filth. Negative emotions are mud and filth. Psychologically, they correspond to literal mire and filth. As has been said several times, we live in what is invisible to others. Our bodies are in visible space, but our thoughts and moods and fears and anxieties and feelings are invisible and constitute where we dwell in the psychological world. It is in this psychological world that we really live. So it has been said that we are all invisible. Through our visible bodies we try to signal to one another in a clumsy way. But actually we are invisible and nearly unknown to one another. This is very strange. Yet the more you reflect on it, the more will you see that it is true. We do not live in the external sense given outer world, but in an invisible, inner psychological world. If we are in the same place in the psychological world, however, we understand our signals better and perhaps even do not have to signal in the usual manner. That is one reason why this work teaches us to learn a common language and practice a common work, a common discipline. Then we are closer in psychological space. In this space, in this psychological or spiritual world, there are definite places where it is possible to receive help. I do not think, as we are, that it is possible to be in two places at the same time, either in the world of physical space or the world of psychological space. In this connection the works says merely that it is impossible to cross a river in two boats. When one comes in contact with a teaching that comes from a particular psychological place that has been reached by others who have labored in the past, then if the teaching is valued and followed it leads to that place where, on the way, one begins to get help. Another reality and another meaning begin to show through what one has hitherto taken to be the only reality and meaning. Every form of esoteric or inner teaching is a way to a place. For example, Christ calls himself a way. Only when it is followed to the end can a person be transformed into a Christian. Yet people begin by imagining they are Christians. Now if a man has no magnetic center, no sense of scale, and therefore no positive ideas, he cannot reach those desirable parts of this psychological country of which we have been speaking. What in our machine, our apparatus, corresponds and relates us to this country? Centers and parts of centers do. They open into different places. Higher parts and lower parts of centers touch different levels in this psychological country, for it is a country of levels, higher and lower, valleys and mountains. For example, if one lives in little I, in negative I, in minute thoughts, in minute self-feelings and self-satisfactions, and so on, one lives in poor dismal valleys internally. State is place. Bad states put a man, or woman, in bad psychological places. It is just like that, just as practical as that. But it is worth thinking about often, that is, once you begin to feel, even faintly, responsible to yourself or your states and cease to say, or think secretly, that it is somebody else's fault. Remember, the work says that you come here to contend only with yourself. Thank any who give you the opportunity to do so. But it is not only a question of coming here, the idea runs through all the work, wherever you are. Work on yourself, whether here or elsewhere. Observe yourself. Consider what the work tells you to observe. Then work on yourself through the material you have collected by observation. But people identify so much with their states. Something makes a person, say, feel miserable. Does it occur to the person that this is exactly where one can work? No, the person simply is miserable, totally identified with the mood. Whereas an inner relaxing, an observing of the thoughts and the feelings and the posture, a remembering of something said in the work, and perhaps in a flash the mood has vanished, or perhaps it gradually lifts. Why? Because you're observing it and so are not it. But if you want the state and enjoy it in this curious way that we do, that is, love our negative states, then how can it disappear? So many will misery or anxiety. To love is to will. We do what we love to do. To be negative and to hate are easy. To hate to be negative is difficult. First, we must feel that in this work we have arrived not to be negative. That is a very deep remark. It is not the same as saying that in the work we have no right to be negative. The pain factory of life demands negative states from sleeping humanity. Only the work gives us the right not to be negative. The work has paid for us in that respect. Others have paid. Is it not a pity that we cannot observe our evil states instead of being them and taking them as ourselves? How shall we ever find the principle of unity in ourselves if we take our changing states as I? To do so seems to me not to understand the work, not to see where it begins. The work begins in you, not outside you. It begins in studying where you are now in this inner psychological space. It is not merely that the kingdom of heaven is within you. This has many mansions. It is to see where you are now internally. The work shows you where you are. This is self-study. This is practical work.